Every pattern you repeat or every choice you can't explain and every version of yourself you keep returning to has a blueprint. Welcome to the Echo Principle, where we map the unseen architecture of human behavior. If you think carefully, you belong here, so drop a like and make sure to subscribe to our channel. There is a moment that happens in every conversation you have ever had. It is happening right now if you are watching this with someone nearby. It happens on dates and in job interviews and at funerals and in arguments. It happens between strangers on a bus who will never speak to each other. It happens between enemies who would deny it with everything they have. You copy the person in front of you. Not deliberately. Not consciously. Not as a strategy or a social performance. You do it the way your heart beats. The way your pupils dilate in low light. It is automatic. It is ancient. And it is quietly running your social life in ways that the thinking part of your brain has absolutely no idea about. In 1999, two psychologists at New York University published a paper that most people outside of academic psychology have never heard of. Tanya, Chartrand and Bargh. Their study was called the Chameleon Effect. And what it showed was not a metaphor. It was a mechanism. A specific measurable subconscious tendency to mirror the posture, the gestures, and the facial expressions of whoever you happen to be sitting across from. Without thinking. Without noticing. Without choosing, and the implications of that mechanism reach so far into how you form bonds and who you trust and why certain people feel like home the moment you meet them, that by the end of this you will never sit in a room with another person quite the same way again. Before we get into what Chartrand and Bargh actually found, it is worth understanding what kind of problem they were trying to solve. Social psychology in the late 1990s had a well-established understanding of deliberate mimicry. Actors do it. Therapists are trained in it. Negotiators use it consciously to build rapport. Cross your arms and the person across from you is more likely to cross theirs. Smile and they smile back. These were known dynamics. Studied. Documented. Unremarkable. What was less understood was whether any of this happened below the level of intention. Whether the body was doing something the mind had not ordered. Whether the social glue between people was being applied by a system that operates entirely outside awareness. The distinction matters enormously. Because if mimicry is only a conscious tool, then it is something you deploy or withhold. A technique. A choice. But if mimicry is running automatically beneath every interaction you have ever had, then it is something closer to a biological infrastructure. The invisible architecture of human connection. Chartrand and Bargh suspected the latter. And they designed a set of experiments so clean and so specific that the results were hard to argue with. They brought participants into a room one at a time. They sat them across from a confederate. Someone working with the researchers who the participant believed was just another subject. And then they simply had them work together on a task, while secretly watching every move. The confederates were given instructions. One would waggle their foot throughout the session. Another would touch their face repeatedly. And the question was simple. Would the participants unconsciously adopt the same behaviors? Without being told. Without noticing. Without any social pressure to conform, the answer was yes. Participants sitting across from a foot waggler began to waggle their own foot. Participants sitting across from a face toucher began to touch their own face. The mimicry was not perfect and it was not immediate, but it was statistically robust and it was entirely outside conscious awareness. When asked afterward, not a single participant reported deliberately copying the confederate. Most were surprised to hear that any copying had occurred at all, but Chartrand and Bargh did not stop there. The second part of the study was where things became genuinely interesting. They wanted to know not just whether mimicry happened, but what it did. What function it served. So they had some confederates mimic the participant deliberately and subtly while others did not. And then they measured how much the participant liked the confederate afterward. How smooth the interaction felt. How connected they reported feeling. The mimic participants liked the confederate more. Rated the interaction as more harmonious. Felt a stronger sense of rapport. Without knowing they had been mimicked. Without being able to say why they felt the way they did. The body had registered something the mind had no language for. This is where the chameleon effect earns its name. A chameleon does not decide to change color. It does not strategize. It does not think about its environment and conclude that adjustment is necessary. The change happens because the environment triggers a biological response that is faster and older than deliberation. Your social nervous system works the same way. When you are in proximity to another human being, something in you begins to attune to them. Their rhythm, their tempo, their physical patterns. And your body begins to echo those patterns back without asking permission from the part of you that believes it is in charge. The researchers called this the perception-action link. The idea is that perceiving a behavior in someone else automatically activates the same motor representation in your own brain. You see a foot waggling and somewhere in your motor cortex the program for foot waggling lights up. Usually that activation does not reach the threshold for actual movement. But under conditions of social proximity and reduced self-monitoring, it leaks through. The behavior executes. The echo happens. This is not a new idea dressed in neuroscience language. William James gestured at something like it in the 1890s when he described ideomotor action. The principle that the mental representation of a movement is sufficient to initiate that movement in the absence of a countervailing thought. You think of raising your arm, and unless something stops you, the arm begins to rise. The thought and the action are not as separate as we assume. Ideomotor action had been observed long before it was named. The 19th century was full of phenomena that turned out to be ideomotor in origin. Dowsing rods that moved toward water in the hands of believers. Pendulums that swung in patterns that seemed to answer questions. Ouija boards. None of these were evidence of supernatural forces. They were evidence of ideomotor action. Small unconscious muscular movements triggered by expectation and belief. The hands move. The rod moves. The planchette moves. And the person holding them experiences the movement as coming from outside themselves. Because in a sense it is. It is coming from a part of themselves they do not have access to. Chevreul demonstrated this in 1833 with a simple pendulum. Carpenter named the mechanism in 1852. William Carpenter, a physiologist who argued that the nervous system did not require conscious will to initiate movement. That perception and representation alone were sufficient. By the time Chartrand and Bargh were running their experiments in the 1990s, the theoretical groundwork had been there for over a century. What they added was the social dimension. They showed that ideomotor action was not just triggered by your own thoughts and expectations. It was triggered by the behavior of the people around you. Other humans were pulling your strings without touching them. And you were pulling theirs. The neuroscience that arrived in the following decade gave this mechanism a cellular address. In the early 1990s, a team of researchers at the University of Parma led by Giacomo Rizzolatti was studying motor neurons in macaque monkeys. They were recording the activity of individual neurons that fired when the monkey reached for food. And then something unexpected happened. One of the researchers reached for food themselves. And the same neurons in the monkey fired. The neurons that coded for the action of reaching fired not when the monkey reached, but when the monkey watched someone else reach. They were watching behavior and their brains were simulating it. Running the motor program internally without executing it externally. These became known as mirror neurons. And when similar systems were identified in humans through neuroimaging, the implications spread quickly across psychology and neuroscience. Mirror neurons, or more accurately the human mirror neuron system, offered a potential biological substrate for empathy, for imitation, for language acquisition, and for the automatic mimicry that Chartrand and Bargh had documented. You watch someone wince in pain and your pain processing regions activate. You watch someone smile and your facial motor cortex prepares the muscles for a smile. You are not just observing the world. You are internally rehearsing it, running simulations of other people inside your own nervous system. The boundary between self and other at the level of neural representation is far more porous than it feels. Now here is where the story gets personal. Because the chameleon effect is not evenly distributed. Not everyone mimics to the same degree. Not every social context produces the same level of unconscious mirroring. And the variables that modulate it reveal something important about what mimicry is actually for. Chartrand and Bargh found that people who scored higher on measures of perspective taking mimicked more. Empathy and mimicry were correlated. The more naturally you orient toward other people, the more your body reflects them back. Later research found that mimicry increases in contexts where you want to affiliate, where you are motivated to connect, where the relationship feels important or uncertain. You mimic more on a first date than with a long-term partner, more in a job interview than at a family dinner. The system is sensitive to social stakes, and it decreases under conditions of competition or social threat. When you are motivated to differentiate yourself from someone rather than connect with them, your unconscious mirroring reduces. The chameleon dims, which means the system is not just automatic, it is also modulated by something. Some layer of social processing that does not rise to conscious awareness but is nevertheless sensitive to context and goal. This suggests that mimicry is not a reflex in the simple sense. It is a social computation, running below awareness but responsive to the social landscape in ways that are genuinely sophisticated. The affiliative function of mimicry has been studied from multiple angles. In 2003, Lakin and Chartrand found that people who had experienced social exclusion mimicked more in a subsequent interaction, as if the system had registered the threat to belonging and increased the affiliative signal in response. Think about what that means. Your body has a social thermostat. It monitors the temperature of your belonging. And when the temperature drops, it turns up the mimicry. Not because you decided to be more charming or more open, but because a system below your awareness detected a deficit and started compensating. You walk out of a situation where you felt rejected and into the next conversation your body is already working to rebuild the connection. Without your permission, without your knowledge. There is research on mimicry and consumer behavior that found that waiters who mirrored their customers' verbal orders received significantly higher tips than those who did not. Not because customers noticed the mirroring. They did not. But because the body registers being echoed as a form of being understood, of being seen. And that registration happens below language, below thought, in a system that is older than both. Moriel Stell and Roos Vonk published work in 2010 showing that mimicry enhanced emotional understanding between people. That mirroring someone's expression was not just a social signal. It was a perceptual tool. The body was using its own physical echo of another person's face to process what that person was feeling. You feel what they feel because you briefly become a copy of them. This brings us to the philosophical edge of what the chameleon effect is actually describing. Because if your body is constantly echoing the people around you, if your facial expressions and your postures and your gestures are being pulled toward those of whoever you are with, then the boundary between where you end and another person begins is not where you think it is. You are not a fixed self moving through a neutral world of other fixed selves. You are a permeable system, constantly being shaped by proximity. constantly broadcasting and receiving. Every room you enter, you begin to become slightly different. Not because you decided to adapt, but because your nervous system is doing what it evolved to do, which is weave you into the social fabric of whoever surrounds you. This has implications for everything from who you become in a long-term relationship to why you tend to adopt the energy of whatever group you spend the most time in. The people around you are not just influencing your opinions and your choices. They are influencing your body, your posture, your tempo, the very rhythm of how you move through space. And here is the part that should genuinely make you pause. You are doing the same to them. Every room you enter, you are pulling the people in it toward you. Your patterns are leaking into their motor systems. Your tempo is modulating their nervous systems. Without a word being spoken. Without any of you being aware that any of this is happening. The chameleon effect also has a dark edge. Because mimicry can be weaponized. And in certain personality profiles it is. Research on individuals with high scores on measures of Machiavellianism has found that deliberate mimicry appears as a social strategy in ways that blur the line between conscious manipulation and unconscious behavior. The natural mimicry that builds genuine connection can be imitated by a system that is not building connection at all. That is building compliance. This is part of what makes certain manipulative individuals so effective. They are good mimics. They reflect you back to yourself with unusual precision. And your body registers this reflection as profound understanding, as safety, as resonance, before your conscious mind has had any chance to evaluate whether the understanding is real. The research on rapport and mimicry in interrogation settings is instructive here. Skilled interrogators use deliberate mirroring to create the felt sense of alliance. The subject feels understood. Feels that the interrogator is on their side. Because their body is being echoed. And the body does not easily distinguish between genuine mirroring and strategic mirroring. Between someone who naturally moves with you and someone who has learned to simulate that movement for a purpose. What all of this points toward is a picture of human sociality that is far more embodied and far less rational than we tend to assume. We like to believe that we choose our connections. That we decide who we trust and who we warm to based on something substantive. On shared values. On demonstrated character. On evidence accumulated over time. And sometimes that is true. But beneath all of that deliberate evaluation, a much faster and much older system is already running its own assessment. Is this person moving like me? Are they breathing like me? Are their gestures echoing mine? And the results of that assessment are shaping how you feel about them before the deliberate evaluation has even begun. The liking that comes from being mimicked is real liking. It is not false. It is not a trick your brain is playing on you in some dismissive sense. It is your nervous system correctly identifying a signal that in the environment it evolved for reliably predicted something important. This person is attuning to me. This person is not a threat. This person is already weaving themselves into my rhythms and I into theirs. That is connection. That is the thing the word connection is trying to describe. And your body knew it before your mind formed a single word about it. Tanya Chartrand continued this line of research for decades after the original 1999 paper. What emerged was a picture of mimicry not as a single phenomenon but as a family of related processes. Behavioral mimicry, emotional contagion, motor resonance. Each operating at different speeds and different levels of the nervous system, but all pointing in the same direction. Toward the other person. The self that feels so solid, so bounded, so distinct, is in constant low-level negotiation with the bodies around it. Adjusting, attenuating, echoing, being echoed. The social brain is not a brain that observes other people from the inside of a fixed self. It is a brain that partially dissolves into other people and partially absorbs them. Continuously. Automatically. Below the level of any story you tell yourself about who you are and what you are choosing. This is what the chameleon code actually is. Not just a tendency to copy foot waggles. It is the mechanism by which humans become each other. By which the individual and the social are not two separate things but one continuous process. You shape the people around you and they shape you, and the shaping happens in the body before it ever reaches the mind. The next time you find yourself in a conversation and you notice that you have adopted the other person's posture without meaning to, do not correct it. It means something is working. Something old and precise and profoundly human is doing exactly what it was built to do. This has been the echo principle. We map the unseen blueprints of human behavior. The self you think of as singular is always already a chorus. Every person you have ever spent time with has left a trace in the way you hold your body. We will see you in the next one.